mother's milk. It goes into the baby's intestinal tract and the baby gets colic. So not only do you have to breastfeed your child, you also have to have a clean diet yourself to prevent this common allergic type of reaction called colic from occurring in a breastfed baby. Lower intestinal problems are quite common also and caused by dairy products, such as bloody stools, painful defecation, constipation, as I talked to you about, colitis, Crohn's disease, and all sorts of colitis have all been associated with dairy product consumption. Respiratory problems such as nasal stuffiness, runny nose, ear infections, sinusitis, asthma, wheezing problems. Bone problems such as generalized nonspecific arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and even juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. I want to tell you, if you want to see a sad case, a couple of times in my medical practice I have seen children, young children who have juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. It's a terrible disease. These children, their bones don't grow. They look like refugees, like little children that would come out of a prisoner of war camp. They're usually in wheelchairs. They have little tiny jaws. Their life is, of course, very short and very painful. I have had 2 children in my practice who have, their parents have understood the message that this can be caused by cow's milk consumption, and both those kids were cured of juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And by the way, that happens to also be published in a British medical journal. Lupus, other kinds of arthritis, dairy products are what you want to think of first. Skin problems like rashes, atopic dermatitis, eczema, seborrhea, and hives. Nervous system problems such as multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, autism, and schizophrenia. There is research in the scientific literature that you can easily find that talks about the cause of autism from cow's milk consumption and the cure of these children simply by changing their diet. Headache problems, fatigue, mental depression, bedwetting problems. You know that psychiatric problem that your child developed because somehow when you changed his or her diaper, you touched in the wrong place? You know that problem, you have to take the child to the psychiatrist to get counseling every month because the child has this psychological problem called bedwetting? Well, I can't tell you the number of parents that write me that say, I've taken the child faithfully to the psychiatrist or the psychologist for years, and they continue to wet their bed until I listen to your advice, which is to get them off the dairy products. It's well described in the scientific literature. What happens is the children consume the milk, goes into their intestinal tract. In some kids, it gets through the gut into the bloodstream, and then it is excreted through the kidney system into the bladder. Well, in the bladder, it causes an allergic type of a reaction. And what happens is the bladder linings, they swell like a giant hive. And as a result of the swelling, the bladder linings become insensitive, so the child can't feel the urine build up in the bladder. And so they go to bed at night, the urine builds up, and the first thing they notice is wet bed sheets. You take the kids off the milk, the swelling disappears, the sensitivity returns, and the bedwetting, the psychiatric emotional problem disappears in many of these children. Very simple solution to the problem. Miscellaneous problems such as iron deficiency and anemia, nephrotic syndrome. This is where the children lose their kidneys from an allergic type of reaction. Glomerulonephritis, where adults also have a similar problems. SIDS, and also hardening of the arteries or atherosclerosis. A lot of you out there have artery problems. You've made some good changes. You've tried to get the fat and the cholesterol out of your diet, and I think that's good. But unfortunately, many of you have not completed the message. You've not really made the step that will really get you to a minimal chance of causing this disease to progress, this closure of the arteries, atherosclerosis, which leads to heart attacks and strokes. You switch to skim milk. Yeah, taking the fat of the cholesterol is good, but what happens is the cow milk protein gets into the bloodstream, and the body makes antibodies to the cow milk protein that attack the lining of your arteries. And it's found in scientific studies that people who have the rottenest arteries have the highest levels of antibodies directed to cow milk protein in their bloodstream. The dairy industry is well aware of these problems. I've been discussing these problems with them for decades, and their only rebuttal is money. $166 million a year. And that could buy a lot of research, a lot of scientists, and a lot of advertisement, and a lot of misinformation. I introduced you to Dr. Greg Miller in the last lecture. Let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Greg Miller. I mentioned to you he's the Senior Vice President of Nutrition Research for the Dairy Association. He's involved in the dairy management and incorporation movement that is the organization that manages Dairy Checkoff 2003, which is out there to promote dairy products for you and your family by designing and carrying out scientific research to prove the healthfulness of dairy products, and also they're out there to promote dairy to your children so they become lifelong consumers. Well, Greg Miller, he's involved in that. Let me tell you how I met him. It was back in the spring of 1993. I did a show, national television show. It was on a program called Lifestyle Magazine that I had a regular segment on. And I had a guest on the show. His name was Dr. Virgil Hulse. Dr. Hulse was an MD, a PhD. He was a former dairy inspector of the state of California. We talked about the health consequences of dairy products. Now remember, this was 1993. We talked about mad cow disease. We talked about bovine leukemia virus, bovine immunodeficiency virus. We talked about heart attacks and obesity and allergies and problems that you knew about for years related to dairy products. We talked about all those things. In the dairy industry, they saw the show. And so they wrote my producer a letter and said, we need equal time. And my producer wrote back and said, okay, fine, you can have equal time. You can be on the show, you can counteract what Dr. McDougall said, but he will be on stage with you. And so we met. We met on Lifestyle Magazine in June of 1993. And we did a half-an-hour television show. And he said the dairy industry has a fine reputation. They're a trusted industry. And that was the bulk of his argument, except he had one special argument that I want to share with you. And this was the main thrust of why you should believe dairy products are good for you. He wouldn't counteract the fact that the dairy products were full of viruses and other kinds of microbes, that they promote heart disease and obesity and diabetes and other problems. He wouldn't counteract any of that. What his main argument was is about 3 minutes into the show, he reached into his pocket and he told us why you should consume dairy products. He said, if there was any thought that dairy products were in any way harmful, there is no way I would let them consume them. And he showed us a picture of his 2 children. His 2-year-old consumes milk, yogurt, and cheese regularly, and his 5.5-month-old is on cow-based formula. And that is the argument from the dairy industry as to why you should consume milk, and that is their counter to the scientific evidence. Those 2 shows, by the way, are shown around the country. They're shown to various groups of people, and they show the Virgil Hulse show, and they'll say, well, there must be an answer that the dairy industry has to this. They wouldn't let Dr. McDougall get away with saying these kinds of things. Well, you come on back next week and we'll show you the other show. And they show them the other show and they're shocked because they've got nothing to say. You know that meat is not health food. You know that. You've heard how red meat's not good for you, how it promotes heart disease and cancer and all kinds of problems. And most of you, most consumers in this country, even though they still consume it, know there's a problem. But you believe in dairy products. You believe they're health food. I want you to change your way of thinking. I want you instead to think of dairy products as liquid meat. And to make my case, what I want you to do is I want you to compare the macronutrient content, in other words, the large nutrients, between dairy products and meat. If you compare beef to cheese, you find that they're both about 70% fat. The amount of protein is very similar, 25 to 30%. You found that they have virtually no carbohydrate. They have no dietary fiber. They both have similar content of cholesterol. They have no vitamin C. So if you can put it in that perspective, if you can stop thinking of cheese and milk and so on as health food, as nature's most perfect food, something you never grow out your need for, if you instead can think of it as liquid meat, then you're getting pretty much on target. People bargain with me all the time. They come to me and they say, you know, I'm ready to change my diet, but just not completely. So I'll just make some small changes. What do you suggest I give up? You know, should I give up cigarettes or should I give up whiskey? Should I give up dairy or should I give up beef? It's a hard one. But sometimes I have to help them make those kinds of decisions. And one of the hardest decisions for women to make is to give up the dairy group. Men can do it. Yeah. I think it's a gender thing. I hope I don't offend anybody here, but I think it's a gender thing. What I find is that men will tell me that they can give up milk and cheese